Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video is all about Eldora Speedway in the Xtreme Dirt Tour with the dirt late models. So I wanted to do a few of the dirt tracks before moving back to the asphalt tracks in the upper 3 series. And I figured Eldora was a very good choice since it is a very popular track to race on. As you can see, I've done 9 races total. This is actually one of the tracks I started with. It took me a few races to actually get the feel for the car that I wanted. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more. We'll also be talking about lap times. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and check out my gameplay video uploaded just a little bit earlier today, which shows a 25 lap race against the maximum difficulty AI. I'll give you an idea of the speeds that AI run, also the lines they run, and so on. So let's go ahead and head to the track. Let's go ahead and start by talking a little bit about lap times. My quickest laps are somewhere in the 14.6 range, but normal race laps, particularly in traffic, are 14.8s, 14.9s, something along those lines, and you'll be perfectly fine against even the maximum difficulty AI. Let's move on to the setup. The shock settings, 3s and 5s for the bump and rebound, respectively, are working out great for me. They basically remove any worries I have about the bumps. Of course, you can also use the shocks to really work on some different handling characteristics, but that's beyond the scope of this particular video. So we'll move on to the weight settings. Of course, we want maximum left side weight, and then we get to the front weight and the wedge, which is what I use to control the speed of the rotation and the amount of rotation of the car, along with a few other things like the springs and the track bar. I found that 50% front weight and 50.5% on the wedge made for a good combination to keep the car rotating but not over rotating. As is generally the case when you're racing against the AI, you want to make sure that you have a good car in traffic. It needs to be stable. So we need it to rotate, but certainly not over rotate or under rotate. And I need to be able to control it at all times. And I feel like these settings that I'm showing you work perfectly for me. Hopefully they'll work okay for you as well. Moving on to the springs. The front springs, 280 and 240. These are some of the stiffest settings that you can have, with the left front being just a little bit higher, stiffer than the right front, simply because I want the car to get that little bit of assistance on corner entry with having a softer right front spring. If you find that the car is a little bit loose on corner entry, then one of the things you can do is increase the right front spring. The rear springs, 240 and 260, I found that a 20-pound split in the rear springs seems to be working very good. And then depending on how much I want the back end to drive the car, I will move the springs up or down. If I want the back end to really drive the car predominantly, I will increase both rear springs. And if I feel like the rear of the car is dominating the front and I'm way too loose, then I will lower both rear springs. So that's a good way to control how much rotation the car is getting, along with the other options that we talked about. Tire settings, pretty standard for me, 23, 24 on the left sides, 30 pounds on the right sides. Again, I'm not saying that's perfect, but it works really good for me. On the miscellaneous settings, the biggest one here is the track bar. The track bar is used to, along with the springs, wedge, and front weight predominantly, to control the rotation of the car. Again, if you feel like the car is too loose and rotates too quickly or too much, then one of the easy fixes for that is simply lower the track bar. Brake bias, I found 55% works pretty good for me, but anywhere between 45 and 55% seem to work okay, just depending on how you use the brakes. Under normal conditions, when I'm in open track, I don't use the brakes at all. In fact, under open track conditions, you could actually run this track wide open. I choose not to, simply for the control factor and being able to place the car exactly where I want to, but it is certainly possible to run the track wide open. What I generally use the brakes for, if at all, in fact, I used them a little bit in the gameplay footage that I mentioned earlier that was posted to the channel earlier today. And I used it when I was really having to pinch off the entry and make a straighter entry into the corner instead of a wider arc that I would prefer. If I'm really having to run a low line on the straightaway, then sometimes I will tap the brake a little bit on entry just to help the car to rotate and get me started on corner exit a little bit quicker than I might normally be able to just by lifting off the throttle. So it's a good option again, and that's where you can, if you want the car to rotate more whenever you touch the brakes, then simply lower the bias. Wheel lock is another option that I've had good results from anywhere between 10 and 15 degrees on the dirt cars. 10 degrees would be if you want a slower rotation of the wheel, and of course lower settings will continue that. The higher you go with this, 15, 18 will make quicker steering. So if you're looking to get the car into the corner with just a small flick of the wheel, then you'll want to increase the wheel lock. Just be careful about getting the car a little bit too loose when doing so. I use a little bit of steering offset to offset some of the camber in the front end. Then we move on to the gear settings. Of course, we only have first and second gear in these particular cars, so you can ignore third and fourth. The rear end ratio, I'm at 4.86, but I have found that 4.71 also works just fine, and probably some others that I simply haven't tested. The higher the number you use for the rear end ratio, the looser the car is generally going to be under throttle. So you can use that as another way to tune the car, particularly if you like the way the car feels, except for it's a little bit too loose on the throttle, then simply lower the rear end ratio a click or two and see if that helps you out. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully these settings will help you out some. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming.